Hello everyone! Welcome to this episode. In this episode we're going to talk about saving, as you probably could have seen in the title of the video. And first of all, I want to talk a little bit about saving itself. So if you look up tutorials on YouTube, you probably find someone who will tell you to save with the help of Unity's player preferences. Let me tell you that this is actually not a good idea, and I'm going to tell you why. So if you save with player preferences, Unity will basically do something similar that we are going to do in this tutorial, but it will write everything to a text file, and this text file can be easily accessible by the player. So the player could just go into the text file, and then, for example, if you have a saved value for the player health, just for an example, then he could just change it from, let's say, 100 to 1 billion, and he would start the game. The game would load the player preferences, and then the player would have 1 billion health, and your game is, it's too easy now because your player is basically unkillable. So don't use player prefs, even though it's the easiest way to save. Instead, use the way that I'm going to show you. And one more thing, saving is a very complex thing, and this is also not the best way to save things. It's not the ultimate way to save things. It's one of the better ways, but you have to change the system around so that it works for your game. So let me show you what we are going to do. So if I go into the play mode, you can see I just set up a little top-down scene with the third-person character, and I can walk around. And now if I press F5, I'm going to save. So I press F5. Now if I walk away and press F9, which is my load button, you can see that I get reset to the position where I saved. So I can do this, like I can save over here, walk away, and then I can press F9, and I'm back at the position where I saved. So this is basically what we're going to do, and we're going to do this through writing to a text file, or it's actually not a text file, it's a binary file which we're going to create. That sounds complicated now, but trust me, it's not so bad. But first, let me get a run through of the scene. So I got the first person character. It comes with the standard assets package, so just import the characters, and of course this is going to work with all type of player characters. Then I got a directional light, which is going to of course light the scene. Then I got a game controller, and this is going to be the most important object we are going to create. So go ahead and create an empty object, set its position to 0, 0, 0, and then you should be fine. Then I have a cube, so this is a floor, and I gave it a color, so this is my material. It's just a standard opaque material, nothing special, I just made it dark. And of course I got my orthographic camera, which gives me a view of the scene. Okay, so now in the folders I made like the most usual way to arrange your scene. So I got the editor folder, which comes with the standard asset. I got the material folder where I have my material color. I have a scenes folder where I save the scene, and I got a scripts folder where I have my scripts. So let's get right into it. So I forgot one more thing. If I go into edit, project settings, input, you can see I added 2 more inputs. One is called save, and I set it to F5, so when I press F5 we're going to save, and I set load to F9. Okay, now we can have a look at the scripts. So let's open the game controller script up. This is the most important one. So the first thing you will notice that we are going to use a lot of namespaces up here. So normally if we have a normal Unity script, we are using the Unity engine and we're using system.collections. But in this case, this is not enough. So we need to write using system, and we need to write using system.runtime.serializations.formatters.binary. That was a long word. So we are going to need this to actually write to a binary file. And you will see what that means in just a second. And we are going to use the namespace system.io, and IO stands for input output. Okay, so make sure that you got those three. And then we have our public class. It's a game controller and it still inherits from mono behavior, so nothing changes here. So now the first thing we have is a public static game controller called game controller. So notice that this is a static variable. So what does that mean? It means that this is going to load the variable into the safe, like into the computer's memory, and it will stay there. So what that means for us is that we can access it through any script, like for example this one, just by typing the name of the script, so in this case game controller, as you can see here, dot and then the variable name, so game controller.gamecontroller, and now we got access to everything inside of the script. So as an alternative, you could of course write game controller, so you make a variable inside of this script, and then you write game controller dot game controller, and then in the start you write game controller dot find game controller equals game controller dot find game object with tag game controller. But there's one thing I learned in the recent past is that you really shouldn't use the find game object with tag or find game object of type. You should always try to avoid having to make references in the script, because it is like it's very heavy on your computing. So if you try to optimize for a bigger game, for example, you just don't have the power to do this for hundreds of objects. So try to avoid getting references as much as you can, and try to do something similar to this. So try to get a workaround around getting a reference to an object in a scene. Of course, sometimes you can avoid it and you can use it sparingly, but you shouldn't use it all the time. That's what I wanted to say. Okay, so now we got the public static game controller variable, and we have three variables, and the three variables are floats, and they're player position X, Y, and Z. So you might ask yourself, why don't we use a vector, which basically those numbers are going to represent. A vector, as a reminder, has an X value, and Y value, and a Z value, and it has a direction. So why don't we use a vector? Simply because you can't serialize it, and what that means is you can't save a vector. You have to save the position as float. So everything that comes with Unity, so for example vectors, quaternions, and stuff like that, you just cannot save them. It's just not possible. So or actually you can serialize them, and therefore you can save them with this method. Okay, so now we got void awake. So void awake is similar to start, but it runs before start, so it's good to for doing things that you need to do before start. So in this case, we are checking if game controller is equal to null. So if there's no game controller, we are going to say don't destroy on load game object. So what this line means is basically if you load a new scene, every object in the scene gets destroyed, and then the Unity loads the next scene and all its game objects. But in this case, we tell Unity, don't destroy this object. So if we have this game controller right here, and then we had another scene, for example, and we would load, all of those would get deleted except this one. This one would still stay there. And then we are just going to tell the script, so the game controller, so this one right here is this, and this means just this game controller in the end. And then we are going to check if there's already a game controller. So if game controller is not equal to null, so if we load into another scene and the other scene already has a game controller, then we are also going to check, is the game controller not equal to this? So if we load into the next scene and we already got a game controller there, we are going to destroy game object, which is of course this game controller. So we make sure that this game controller right here, the game controller we start out with, so in this case it would be this one right here, we make sure that it's the only game manager in the whole game, game controller, sorry. It's the whole game controller in the whole game. So this is called a singleton or singleton manager. It makes sure that it's the only one of its kind, and it's there to handle some data, and this data is going to be this stuff right here. Okay, so now we got a public void save, but before we have a look at this, just let me scroll down. So we got a class. You can have another class inside of the same text file because it's not public. So you have a class, and I called it player data. And inside of here we got public floats, and they're called player pos x, player position y, and player position z. And this class is serializable. So this is important because of the reason I told you before. It has to be serializable because otherwise we are not able to write those things to a file. Okay? So now that we got this out of the way, let's go back up here. So in the first part of the whole logic inside of this block is we are going to create a binary formatter and a file. So a binary formatter is basically there to write to a binary file. If you don't know what binary is, it's basically like the whole computer thing with 1 0 1 0 0 0 1. You know that. It's basically what binary means. Bi means 2, just for your information. So we got the binary formatter BF. It's just short for best friend. No, just kidding, it's for binary formatter. And this binary formatter we are just going to call the constructor, so new binary formatter, nothing special here. And we are going to have a file stream because we're going to create a file. And I call this file stream file. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create, so we are writing file.create, so we're going to create a new file. And in this case, the first thing we need to add to the file.create thing right here, as you can see in the tool box down there, it tells you filestream.file create, and it wants a string path. Okay, so the path in this case is application.persistent data path. Application.persistent data path is something that Unity provides to you, and it will just put all the information that you're going to save to this location. And this right here works on every platform. This is very important if you're making an Android game, if you're making a, I don't know, PlayStation 3 game, if you're making a PlayStation 4 game, if you're making a computer game, if you're making a, I don't know what, if you're making one for Mac, for example. application of persistent data path always gives you a valid location to actually save your data to. The only exception is everything that has to do with your web browser, because you cannot save into the web browser. You have to save to a server, and in this case it's getting a little bit more complicated and I don't want to get into this. So then we need one more thing. So sorry. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this part of the string is going to be the application of persistent data path plus, so we're chaining two strings together, and then those little quotation marks and then slash. So if you have a look at Windows Explorer, for example, and then I just pick some folder, for example. So if we have a look at this, you can see that we have C users, the name of the users, and my name is Kevin, and then downloads, and then the whole stuff here. Okay, so as you can see, those subfolders, so this is a folder, this is a folder, this is a folder, and this is a folder, they're all divided by those slashes right here. And we're going to use the same thing right here. So we're just going to tell the whole create file what the name of the file is going to be. So in this case it's playerinfo.dat. Don't get confused by the ending, it could also be .I don't care. In the end it doesn't matter. It's just normal that you usually write it as a dat. Okay, dat for data, of course. Okay, so now that we got through this, let me just save. We are actually going to create an object to save the data to. So we're going to we're going to make a new player data. Again, this is this class down here. So we're going to have player data equals new player data. So just calling the constructor as always with objects. So then we're going to have data dot player plus x. So this is this variable right here. So data.player plus x is equal to player position x, which is the variable up here. And then we're going to have the same one for y and for z. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, the variables in here, they're going to be equal to the number which is going to be in those variables. And those variables are going to be managed by the player save right here, but we will get to this in just a moment. Okay, so now the final thing we need to do is we're going to write the object to the file and close it. So we're going to write bf, so the binary formatter, .serialize. Again, here's the keyword. We're going to serialize the whole thing. This is the reason why this has to be serializable. It's very important. So we're going to serialize, and what are we going to serialize? We're going to serialize file, and we're going to write data in it. So we're going to write into the file, we're going to write the data in it, and then we're closing the file. So in the end, what we do is we open up a file, we store some variables, and then we're going to write those variables into the file. So as you can see, saving is a little bit complicated. And now the next thing is the load. It is not so difficult actually, it's basically the same thing as we did here. But first we have to check if there's already a file with the name playerinfo.dat, because if you try to load and there's no save file, then you could get errors, and this is stupid. So always check before you load something if there's actually data to load. For example, if you if you have a game, it often is that you only get in the beginning that you have only the option to start a new game, and not load one. This is because the developer couldn't put it in like something like this, and then they would have to force you to actually create data in the first place before you can actually load the game. So it's just another way to make sure that the player first has created data to actually load. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to make another binary formatter, and then we have a new file stream, and in this case we're not going to create it, we are going to open it up. So we are going to go to the string, and then the file mode is open, so that just tells the game open this file. It's nothing special, it's like double click on a text file basically. And then we're going to open up the data, and then we're going to write bf.deserialize, and we're going to deserialize the file. So we're going to translate everything that is written into this file back into information for our game, and to do this successfully we have to actually tell the deserialize how to translate it back. And in this case we want to translate it back as player data. And this line right here is the reason why this is a lot better than actually writing to player prefs. Because player prefs, as I told you, it's just a normal text file with all the information inside it, and you can easily go in there and write and change inside of it, like values and variables. If you make an RPG, for example, you can give yourself like, I don't know, 1 trillion XP. In this case it's not easily possible because first of all the file is hidden because player application.persistent data path is somewhere in a hidden folder called like percentage app data percentage. It's a hidden folder in Windows if you have a Windows game. So a lot of players don't even know how to access this folder. Then the next thing is if they find the file, it's still written in binary, so it's only like 1001s and stuff like that. So again, a lot of players are not able to actually read the file. And then even if you find the file and you know what to do, you still have to find out as what class you have to put out the file, like to read the file, to actually, or to deserialize the file, to actually do something with it. And this is another step of protection. So if you want to have more protection than that, you have to actually get like into encoding and encrypting and stuff like this. So this is the most secure way without actually having to write code as like specially dedicated to making the script harder to read or to actually secure the files. I know this is a lot of information, and sorry, and I hope you bear with me, but we are done through it soon. Okay, so now the next thing we do is we're going to say the player position. So this is this variable up here. The player position.x is equal to the data player position.x. So we're just going to read the data from the file and put it into a variable for our game. As you can see, we just do this for the x, the y, and the z. Okay, so now the last thing I added is a public void delete. So in case you want to delete the file, you want to create a new save or something like this, we are just going to check if the file exists. So again, we can't delete a file if it doesn't exist in the first place. And then we are just going to write file.delete and then application.persistence data path and then delete the file right here. So this is actually not so complicated. So now we got through the whole script. Again, to recap, we have some variables for a game. We are going to check if the game controller is the only game controller in the game, and we make sure that it stays that way, and we are making sure that it doesn't get destroyed on a load, so it will persist forever. Then we write our save in which we create a binary formatter and a file. Then we are creating an object to save the data to, and then we are going to write the data into the file. If we load the game, we just check if the file already exists, and then if it does, we open it up. We are deserializing it and also closing it. And then we're going to assign the variables from the data back to the variables in our game. And then we get a public void delete in case we want to delete the text, not text file, in case we want to delete the file. Okay, so then what I have done is, after I created the script, I just made a game controller game object and tagged it as game controller, and I simply put on the script. So that's like nothing special. Okay, so now the last thing is I created a script to actually save, to access the saving stuff, and I put it onto the player. So as you can see, it's right here. So now if I open it up, we get a void update, and in the void update I check for an input and I called it got key down and then keycode.x. So if I press X, I'm going to say game controller. So as I told you, we are using a static variable, so this is easily accessible. So game controller.gamecontroller.delete. So we are just going to call this method in the end. And this is also the reason why this stuff has to be public. As you can see, they're all public. Okay. And then I check if we get the input get button on save. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the variables, which are for the game. So game controller.gamecontroller player position X, position Y, and position Z. And they're equal to transform.position.x and Y and Z. So we're going to take the numbers which are inside of here and just write them to the numbers here, here, and here. Nothing special in the end. And then if I press load, I'm just going to call the load method, and I already explained this in detail for you. So we're going to load data, and then I'm going to say transform.position is equal to a new vector 3, and this new vector 3 is the X is game controller dot player position X, comma game controller dot player position Y, comma, and game controller dot player position Z, comma, actually no comma this time, and then close the bracket and put a semicolon there. I just wrote it like this instead of like the normal way would be new vector 3 and then you write like X, Y, and Z inside of this thing. And what I did is basically I just put like I basically just did this so it's easier to read. You can imagine if I would have put this all in one line, this line would be like very, very huge. So let me delete this and then save. And now if I go back into the game and play one more time, so I press F5, now I've actually written to a file. I go over here, press F9, I load from the file and set my player to this position. So I save, go back up, press F9, I save, press F9, and as you can see this works wonderfully. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is how you can apply this for your own game. So what you're going to need is, of course, you need a game controller and you need variables for basically everything. So if your player has a health value, you have to save the health value with the health value, not the wealth value. Perhaps you even have a wealth value, I don't know. And you have to create a variable for it. You have to create a variable down here. You have to save it and load it in here. You have to somehow write to it in this script. You have to make a variable for, I don't know, for the rotation. You do the same way as you do the same thing with Quaternion. So with Quaternions, again, you have to write every single number into its own float or integer or whatever, or float in this case. And yeah, so you need a variable for basically everything that you want to save. You have to save the position, you have to save the health, you have to save the money, you have to save the points that the player has. And you can do the same thing with the enemies. If you have enemies in your game, then you have an enemy, and then you can have, down here you would have a class called enemy data, and then you just write to this and so on and so on. So as I told you in the beginning, you have to adjust this system according to your game. So saving is a little bit more complicated, and I'm sorry if I have confused a lot of you, but I just couldn't do this in a very beginner friendly way. So I hope you understood something, and if not, this might still be useful for you. But I hope you can you're able to actually like save your own data. And yeah, so again, sorry if I have confused you. This is not so beginner friendly as my usual tutorials, but this is just I just can't avoid this in the end, because saving is a little bit more complicated. It is very important that you do it the right way. So please, I know that the player press way is a lot easier, but please don't do it, because you will regret it in the end, because your players are just going to cheat through everything. Or I don't know, if you're making a multiplayer game, it's even worse. You could just easily hack everything, and then you would be really sad that your multiplayer game isn't fun because of all the hackers you got. So try to actually understand what I have done here. And yeah, so also you have, as I said many times before, you have to actually, you know, you have to adjust this to actually be suitable for your game, because right here I'm just saving the position of the player, but you have to save so many more things. You basically have to save every single variable that you got that is important for your game, so like health, money and stuff like that. Okay, so now that we got through this episode, it's already half an hour long, so I'm sorry for that. And yeah, I'm also sorry that I didn't upload in the last time, because I had a lot of schoolwork to do, and I'm nearly finished with all the schoolwork for this school year. So then I can start to increase my frequency in which I upload tutorials. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please leave a like and also consider subscribing for more like this. If you want to see any special topic covered by me, just leave a comment in the comment section down below and I might have a look at it. And yeah, so thanks for watching. As always, don't forget to smile, and until next time, bye guys.